She was just a cleaning lady, invisible to the world, scrubbing marble floors in silence. But one night, the Arab millionaire she worked for called her to his bedside. With trembling hands, he whispered a final wish that no one else had ever heard. What she did next would change everything, forever. Stay with me until the end, because this story will break your heart and inspire you at the same time. Before we begin, take a second to like this video, hit subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. Amira had grown used to being invisible. At 25, she moved through the grand mansion like a ghost, her footsteps muffled by thick Persian carpets. The marble columns gleamed under her careful attention. The crystal chandeliers sparkled from her delicate touch. But no one ever really saw her. She was just another face among the dozens of staff who kept the estate running. The mansion belonged to Khalil al-Rashid, a 60-year-old business tycoon whose empire stretched across 3 continents. Oil, real estate, shipping, you name it, his fingerprints were on it. But for all his wealth and power, there was something hollow about him. Amira noticed it in the way he walked through his own home, shoulders slightly bent, eyes distant, as if he were searching for something that money couldn't buy. She'd been working there for 8 months now. Every morning at 6, she would slip through the service entrance, tie her dark hair back, and begin her rounds. The East Wing first, then the library with its towering shelves of books that no one ever read, followed by the dining room, where crystal glasses sat perfectly arranged for meals that were often eaten alone. Khalil rarely spoke to the staff directly. When he needed something, he would speak to Hassan, his personal assistant, who would then relay the message down the chain. But sometimes, Amira would catch him watching her work. Not in a way that made her uncomfortable, but with a kind of quiet curiosity, as if he were trying to understand something about her dedication to making his world pristine. The other staff members whispered about him. They said he'd been married once, years ago, to a woman who died in a car accident. No children, no close family. Just an endless parade of business associates and acquaintances who smiled too widely and spoke too loudly whenever they visited. Amira came from a different world entirely. She lived in a small apartment 20 minutes away by bus, sending most of her earnings back home to Lebanon to support her elderly parents and younger brother, who was studying engineering. Her own dreams of becoming a teacher had been set aside when her father fell ill, but she never complained. Work was work, and she was grateful to have it. What struck her most about Khalil wasn't his wealth or the way people bowed and scraped around him. It was his loneliness. She recognized it because she carried her own version of it. The ache of being far from everything familiar, working in silence among people who spoke a different language, dreaming in Arabic while living in English. One afternoon in late autumn, while she was polishing the mirrors in the main hallway, she noticed Khalil standing at the top of the grand staircase. He was holding a photograph, his thumb tracing the edge of the frame. When he saw her looking, he didn't turn away like he usually did. Instead, he descended the stairs slowly, each step deliberate. "You're very thorough," he said in accented English, his voice softer than she'd expected. Amira paused her work, cloth still in hand. "Thank you, sir." "Where are you from?" he asked, though something in his expression suggested he already knew. "Beirut, sir, Lebanon." He nodded, a flicker of recognition crossing his features. "Beautiful city. I have business there sometimes." He looked at the photograph again, then back at her. "You work very hard. I notice these things. I try to do my best, sir." "Yes," he said quietly. "Yes, I can see that." He started to turn away, then stopped. "What's your name?" Amira, sir. The Amira. He repeated it like he was tasting the syllables. Beautiful name. After that day, their interactions became slightly less formal. Not friendly exactly, but acknowledging. He would nod when he passed her in the corridors. Once, when she was struggling to reach a high shelf in the library, he appeared with a step stool without her having to ask. The change was subtle but noticeable to Amira. The other staff members began to whisper that she was receiving special attention, though she couldn't understand why. She performed the same duties with the same care she always had. If anything, she worked harder, arriving earlier and staying later, determined not to give anyone reason to question her presence there. Winter arrived with unusual severity. The mansion's heating system worked perfectly, but somehow the cold seemed to seep into its bones anyway. Khalil appeared more frail during these months, moving more slowly, spending longer hours in his study staring out at the snow-covered gardens. Amira learned from Hassan that Khalil had been receiving regular visits from doctors. Specialists from London and New York flew in for consultations that lasted hours behind closed doors. The staff was instructed to be extra quiet during these visits, to keep the mansion running smoothly without drawing attention to themselves. It was during one of these medical visits that Amira first noticed blood on the handkerchief Khalil thought he'd hidden in his jacket pocket. She was cleaning his study when she found it discarded in the wastebasket, the white fabric stained dark red. Her heart clenched with a recognition she didn't want to acknowledge. Her own father had hidden his symptoms the same way in the beginning. The coughing fits dismissed as seasonal allergies, the fatigue blamed on long workdays, the gradual weight loss attributed to stress. By the time they'd gotten him to a doctor, the cancer had already spread too far for the treatments they could afford. She never mentioned what she'd seen, but something shifted in the way she looked at Khalil after that. The loneliness she'd observed before took on a different quality. It wasn't just the isolation of wealth or grief anymore. It was the solitude of someone facing mortality without anyone to share the burden. The medical visits became more frequent as winter deepened. Khalil's color grew pale, his movements more careful. Yet he continued to maintain his daily routines, conducting business calls from his study, reviewing documents that Hassan brought for his signature, hosting the occasional dinner for associates who left talking loudly about deals and percentages. One evening in February, while Amira was finishing her work in the library, she heard raised voices from Khalil's study. Through the partially open door, she could see him standing behind his desk, facing two men in expensive suits. "The treatments are experimental at best," one of them was saying. "You need to think about succession planning, about what happens to the companies." "I'm not dead yet," Khalil replied, his voice steady but strained. "Of course not, but realistically, we're looking at months, not years. The board needs direction." Amira quietly closed the library door and continued her work, but the conversation stayed with her. Months, not years. She thought of her father's final weeks, how he'd rallied his strength to tell each of his children what they meant to him, to share stories about their mother, to make sure they understood they were loved. Who would be there for Khalil when his time came? Hassan was loyal, but ultimately an employee. The business associates circled like vultures, more interested in his assets than his well-being. The mansion was filled with people, but none of them really knew him. That night, as Amira rode the bus home through the snowy streets, she found herself thinking about loneliness and dignity, about what it meant to face the end of life surrounded by wealth but without love. She didn't know then that within days everything would change, that a conversation in the quiet hours of night would alter both their lives in ways neither could have imagined. The change came on a Thursday night in March. Amira was finishing her evening rounds, ensuring every surface gleamed under the soft lighting that Hassan dimmed precisely at 9:30 each evening. She was walking past Khalil's bedroom when she heard her name called softly from behind the heavy oak door. She paused, thinking perhaps she'd imagined it. The mansion often played tricks with sound, voices echoing from distant rooms, footsteps that seemed to come from empty hallways. But then she heard it again, clearer this time. "Amira!" She knocked gently on the doorframe. "Yes, sir? Please come in." The bedroom was larger than her entire apartment, with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the gardens. Khalil sat propped up in bed, wearing a simple white nightshirt that made his skin appear even more pale than usual. The bedside table was cluttered with pill bottles and glasses of water, evidence of the battle he fought each day. "Sir, is everything all right? Should I call Hassan?" He shook his head slowly. "No, no. Hassan has done enough for one day. Please, sit." He gestured to the chair beside his bed, the same chair where doctors had delivered their grim assessments week after week. Amira remained standing, uncertain. In 8 months of working there, she had never been invited to sit in his presence, had never had a conversation that lasted more than a few polite exchanges. "Please," he repeated, his voice carrying a gentleness she hadn't heard before. "I need to speak with you." She sat carefully on the edge of the chair, her back straight, hands folded in her lap. The room smelled of expensive cologne mixed with something medicinal that reminded her too much of hospital corridors. "You've been watching me," he said quietly. Amira's heart skipped. Had she overstepped somehow? Been too obvious in her concern? "Sir, I didn't mean to—" "No, no. Not watching like that. Caring. I see how you look at me when you think I don't notice. The way you've started leaving fresh flowers in my study, though that's not in your duties. The way you fold my newspapers just so, making sure the pages aren't wrinkled." She felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I only wanted to do my job well. It's more than that, and we both know it." He reached for a glass of water, his hands trembling slightly. "You recognize something in me, don't you? Something familiar." Amira met his eyes for the first time during their conversation. In them, she saw the same quiet desperation she'd witnessed in her father's final months, the weight of unfinished business and words left unsaid. "Ah, my father," she whispered. He had the same look. Khalil nodded slowly. "Cancer?" "Yes, sir." "How long did you have with him?" "After you knew?" 6 months. We thought we had longer, but—" She trailed off, the memory still sharp after 3 years. "I have less than that," he said matter-of-factly. "The doctors were very clear this morning. 8 weeks, perhaps 10 if I'm fortunate." The words hung in the air between them. Amira felt tears threatening, but held them back. This wasn't about her grief. It was about his. "I'm sorry, sir." "Don't be sorry for me, Amira. I've lived more life than most men could imagine. I've built empires, traveled to every corner of the world, owned things that others only dream of. But there's something I never had, something I never thought I wanted until it was too late." He leaned back against his pillows, his breathing slightly labored. "Do you know what it's like to realize you've spent 60 years building a legacy for no one? To understand that when you die, everything you've worked for will be divided among strangers who see only dollar signs?" Amira thought of her own family, how her small salary helped keep her brother in university, how her parents blessed her name in their evening prayers. "No, sir. I can't imagine. And I envy you," he said softly. "You send money home to Lebanon, don't you? Hassan mentioned it once. Your family depends on you, thinks of you, prays for your safety. They do. Yeah, that's wealth, Amira. Real wealth. The kind I never understood how to earn. They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes. Outside, the wind rustled through the bare branches of the oak trees that lined the estate's borders. Somewhere in the distance, a night bird called out, its voice echoing across the empty grounds. "There's something I need to tell you," Khalil said finally. "Something I've never told another living soul." Amira leaned forward slightly, sensing the importance of whatever was coming next. 15 years ago, I was married to a woman named Layla. Beautiful, intelligent, everything I thought I wanted in a wife. But I was so consumed with business, so focused on the next deal, the next acquisition, that I never really saw her. Never really listened when she tried to tell me what she needed. His voice grew quieter, more strained. She wanted children. Begged me for years to start a family. But I kept saying later, after this merger, after that project, when the timing was better. There was always something more important than the life she wanted to build with me. Amira said nothing, understanding that sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is simply bearing witness to their truth. The night she died in that car accident, she was driving to her sister's house. They'd had a fight earlier that day, and Layla needed someone to talk to. Someone who would listen to her dreams instead of dismissing them. He paused, his hands clenching the bedsheets. She was pregnant, Amira. 3 months pregnant. And I didn't even know. The revelation hit Amira like a physical blow. She understood now why the mansion felt so hollow, why Khalil moved through his days like a man haunted by ghosts. The doctors told me later, after the funeral, said she'd probably been planning to surprise me with the news. But I was in Dubai that week, closing another deal that seemed so crucial at the time. I can't even remember what it was for now. Tears ran silently down Amira's face, but Khalil seemed lost in his memories, staring at something beyond the present moment. I've spent 15 years wondering what that child would have looked like, what kind of person they would have become, whether they would have had Layla's laugh or her stubborn streak, whether they would have been proud of their father or ashamed of the way he put money before love. He turned to look at Amira directly, his eyes intense despite his physical frailty. "I'm telling you this because I have a request to make. Something that may sound impossible, even foolish. But it's the only thing that matters to me now. The only way I can think of to make peace with the mistakes I've made." Amira felt her heart racing, sensing that whatever he was about to ask would change everything between them, would alter the careful boundaries that had defined their relationship. "What is it, sir?" Khalil took a deep breath, gathering his strength for what came next. "I want to give you something, Amira. Not money, not a better job or a bigger apartment. Something more valuable than anything in this mansion." He reached for her hand, his fingers cold but steady. "I want to give you the chance to fulfill the dream that Layla and I never got to share." Amira's breath caught in her throat. The words hung between them like something fragile and sacred. She searched his face, trying to understand what he was truly asking of her. "Sir, I don't understand what you mean." Khalil's grip on her hand tightened slightly. "I want you to have a child, Amira. My child. The heir that Layla and I never had the chance to create together." The room seemed to spin around her. She pulled her hand back instinctively, her mind racing to process what she'd just heard. "Mr. Shum al-Rashid, I can't. That's not something I can do. Please, hear me out before you refuse." His voice carried a desperation she'd never heard from him before. "I'm not asking you to be my wife. I'm not asking you to love me or pretend this is something it isn't. I'm asking you to give me the one thing that money can't buy, a legacy that isn't built on oil wells or real estate contracts." Amira stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. The gardens stretched out below, perfectly manicured even in the darkness. You're asking me to carry a child for you. To give birth to your heir. Yes. And then what? You die and leave me to raise this child alone? You think that's fair to me or to the baby? Khalil shifted in his bed, wincing slightly from the effort. No, you don't understand. I've thought about this for weeks, planned every detail. The child would inherit everything, the businesses, the properties, all of it. But you would be their guardian, their mother in every sense that matters. You would never want for anything again. Amira turned back to face him, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. This isn't about money, Mr. Al-Rashid. This is about my life, my body, my future. You're asking me to become pregnant with a man I barely know, to carry a child whose father will be dead before they take their first steps. I know how it sounds, he said quietly. But think about what this could mean for your family in Lebanon. Your brother could finish his engineering degree without you having to work yourself to exhaustion. Your parents could have the medical care they need. You could have the teaching career you've always wanted. The mention of her family hit its mark. Amira thought of her mother's arthritis, how she hid her pain when they spoke on the phone, her father's breathing problems that grew worse each winter, her brother Ahmed, brilliant and dedicated, but always one tuition payment away from having to abandon his studies. Well, you investigated my family? Hassan mentioned them. I made some inquiries, yes. Not to invade your privacy, but to understand what motivates you, what you care about most. Amira felt violated and touched at the same time. No one in her adult life had cared enough to learn about the people who mattered to her. Yet the fact that he'd done so without her knowledge felt like a betrayal of trust. You had no right. You're correct. I overstepped, but everything I learned only confirmed what I already knew about you. You're selfless, devoted, willing to sacrifice your own dreams for the people you love. That's exactly the kind of person I want raising my child. The word "my" echoed strangely in the room. Amira realized that despite his wealth and power, Khalil had probably never said those words about another human being. My wife, my child, my family. The possessives that gave life meaning had been absent from his vocabulary for decades. What makes you think I would be a good mother? She asked, her voice softer now. I've never had children. I've spent the last 3 years cleaning houses and sending money home. I don't know anything about raising a baby. You know about love, he said simply. You know about sacrifice and dedication and putting someone else's needs before your own. Those are the only qualifications that matter. Amira moved back to the chair but didn't sit. And what about the pregnancy itself? The doctors, the hospital bills, the time I'd need to take off work? Everything would be handled by the finest medical team in the country. You would live here, in the mansion, with round-the-clock care. Hassan would coordinate everything. You wouldn't lift a finger except to take care of yourself and the baby you're carrying. The practical details seemed almost mundane compared to the enormity of what he was proposing. Amira tried to imagine herself pregnant, her body changing, growing heavy with new life. A child who would never know their father except through stories and photographs. How? She whispered. Khalil's cheeks flushed slightly. There are medical procedures, artificial insemination, nothing that would require physical intimacy between us. I know this situation is already complicated enough without adding that element. Relief flooded through her at his words. The thought of physical relations with her employer, a man old enough to be her father, had been one of her immediate concerns. The doctors who've been treating you, they could arrange this. Dr. Rahman has already confirmed it's possible. My condition doesn't affect fertility. and you're young and healthy. From a medical standpoint, there would be no complications. Amira realized that Khalil had been planning this conversation for much longer than she'd initially thought. The medical consultations, the research into her background, even the gradual increase in their interactions over recent weeks. It had all been leading to this moment. You've been thinking about this for a while. Since the diagnosis became terminal, yes. At first, I considered other options. Adoption, hiring a surrogate through an agency, but those felt cold, impersonal. When I watched you work, saw how you cared for things that weren't even yours, I knew you were the right choice. The right choice, Amira repeated, tasting the words. Like selecting a business partner or choosing an investment. Khalil flinched at her tone. That's not how I meant it, isn't it? You've reduced me to a checklist of qualities you find desirable for this transaction. Hardworking, check. Loyal to family, check. Financially desperate enough to consider your offer, check. Amira, please, I know this is overwhelming, but… Overwhelming? She laughed, but there was no humor in it. Mr. Al-Rashid, you're asking me to create a human being with you, to carry your child for 9 months, give birth, and then spend the rest of my life raising them alone while managing an empire I know nothing about. Overwhelming doesn't begin to cover what this is. Khalil was quiet for a long moment, studying her face. When he spoke again, his voice was different, more vulnerable than she'd ever heard it. You're right. I've approached this like a business deal because that's the only way I know how to handle important decisions. But this isn't about quarterly profits or market share. This is about creating something beautiful and meaningful from a life that's been largely empty of both. He paused, gathering his thoughts. I'm not asking you to love me, Amira. I'm asking you to love a child who doesn't exist yet, but who could be the best thing either of us ever does. I'm asking you to give me the chance to leave something good behind when I go. The sincerity in his voice made her chest ache. She could see past his wealth and authority to the lonely, dying man beneath. A man who'd spent his life accumulating things instead of relationships, who'd realized too late that success without love was just elaborate emptiness. I need time to think, she said finally. Of course. Take all the time you need. How much time do we actually have? If I were to agree, I mean, how long before the medical procedures would need to happen? Khalil's expression grew more grave. The doctors recommend we don't wait longer than 4 weeks. My condition is progressing faster than initially expected. 4 weeks. Amira felt the weight of the deadline settling on her shoulders. 4 trajectory of her life. They're weeks to make a decision that would alter the entire something else you need to know. Khalil continued. Something about what would happen after the child is born. Amira steeled herself for another revelation. What? I've already begun changing my will. If you agree to this, you'll be named as the primary guardian and trustee of the estate until the child reaches 18. But there are conditions, safeguards to ensure the money is used appropriately. What kind of conditions? The child must be raised with knowledge of their Lebanese heritage, must speak Arabic as well as English. They must understand the value of hard work and compassion, not just wealth and privilege. And you must promise that you'll tell them about Layla, about the woman who should have been their mother. Tears gathered in Amira's eyes again. Even in death, Khalil wanted to honor his late wife's memory, to ensure she remained part of the story he was trying to create. You've really thought of everything, haven't you? I've had nothing but time to think these past few months. Time and regret make for thorough planning. Amira walked back to the window, pressing her forehead against the cool glass. Outside, the first hints of dawn were beginning to lighten the eastern horizon. Soon, Hassan would arrive to begin another day of managing Khalil's declining world. The other staff members would start their routines, unaware that everything might be about to change. "If I say yes," she said without turning around, "what happens to us? I mean, during the pregnancy. Do I continue working as your housekeeper while carrying your child? No. You would become part of the family in a sense. Not my wife, but not an employee either. Something new, something we'd have to figure out as we go." The ambiguity of her potential new role both frightened and intrigued her. She'd spent her entire adult life in clearly defined positions: daughter, sister, employee. The idea of existing in some undefined space between servant and family member felt like stepping into uncharted territory. "And after you die? What happens to me then?" "You become one of the wealthiest women in the Middle East," Khalil said matter-of-factly. "You raise your child with every advantage money can provide, but more importantly, with the love and wisdom I know you possess. Your child, not his child or their child, but hers." The shift in language wasn't lost on Amira. Khalil was offering her not just financial security, but something deeper: the chance to be completely, unconditionally needed by another human being. She thought of her own childhood, raised by parents who loved her, but who'd struggled every day to provide basic necessities. What would it be like to raise a child who never had to worry about having enough food or warm clothes or medical care? A child who could pursue any dream, attend any university, travel anywhere in the world. But what about the loneliness? The weight of being the only parent, the only decision-maker, the only one responsible for shaping this child's character and future. "I need to call my family," she said suddenly. Khalil looked surprised. "You want to discuss this with them?" "Not the details. But I need to hear their voices. I need to remember why I'm here, what I'm working for." "Of course. Use the phone in my study. Take as long as you need." Amira headed toward the door, then stopped. "Mr. Al-Rashid?" "Yes. If I decide to do this, it won't be for the money. It will be because I believe every child deserves to be wanted, to be loved, to have someone fight for their future. Even if that someone is a stranger who's never been a mother before." Khalil's eyes filled with tears. "That's exactly why I knew you were the right choice." As Amira left the room and walked through the quiet hallways toward Khalil's study, she realized that her life had just been divided into two distinct parts: everything before this conversation and everything that would come after. The decision she made in the coming days wouldn't just determine her future. It would determine whether a dying man's greatest regret could somehow be transformed into his most meaningful gift. The phone felt heavy in her hand as she dialed the familiar number. In a few hours, the sun would be high over Beirut, and her mother would be preparing breakfast while her father read the morning paper. Her brother would probably still be asleep, dreaming of the engineering projects he hoped to design someday. They had no idea that their youngest daughter was about to make a choice that could change all their lives forever. As her mother's sleepy voice answered the phone, Amira felt tears she'd been holding back finally spill over. The familiar sound of Arabic mixed with the crackling international connection made her homesickness surge like a physical pain. "Mama, it's me. Amira, Habibti. Why are you calling so early? Is everything all right?" Amira glanced at the ornate clock on Khalil's desk. It was barely dawn in Texas, which meant mid-morning in Beirut. Her sense of time had become completely distorted by the weight of the conversation she just had. "I'm fine, Mama. I just wanted to hear your voice." "You sound different." "Tired." "Are they working you too hard at that big house?" If only she knew, Amira thought. "No, it's not that." "How is Baba feeling? And Ahmed?" Your father had a good day yesterday. He walked to the market with me, complained about the prices like always. Her mother's laugh was warm but tinged with worry. Ahmed passed his midterm examinations, top of his class as usual. He asks about you constantly. 3 weeks later, Amira stood in the same bedroom where her life had changed forever. Khalil's breathing was shallow now, his hand barely warm in hers. She placed her other hand on her stomach, where new life was already growing. He'd lived long enough to know his wish was fulfilled, long enough to see hope replace the emptiness in his eyes. "Why, thank you," he whispered, his voice barely audible, "for giving me something to leave behind." When Khalil passed that night, Amira didn't just inherit his fortune. She inherited his dreams, his regrets, and his chance at redemption. 9 months later, she welcomed Layla into the world, a beautiful daughter named for the woman who should have been her mother. Today, Amira teaches at the finest schools while raising a child who speaks 3 languages and knows the value of both wealth and compassion. She kept every promise she made to a dying man who taught her that sometimes the greatest gifts come from the most unexpected places. Love isn't always romantic. Sometimes it's choosing to fulfill someone's deepest wish when they have nothing left to offer but hope.